Gets back to Mill, gets the flower, goes home. 2 days later, which was the next day, 2 days after the meeting, the British go to attack the Americans at White Plains. And they walk right into a bunch of cannons waiting for them. And it turns out the British got the tail kicked. And so they come back to town. Major Andre knows somebody sold him out. And he went to Lydia and said, okay, who in your family is awake? She said, all my family is asleep. He says, well, I know you were asleep because I had knocked 3 times to wake. They never figured out who it was. But she got excommunicated from her church. Her husband wasn't going to get involved, but she saved the lives.
Well, hang on, I've got to take a break. And if that wasn't, I mean, I think he could probably go on for another 20 minutes. I hope that answered your question. We'll be back in just a second. Sorry. America, I want you to know this summer is, we are going to try to restore a few pieces of our history, and we are working on something that will air most likely in August that I think is vitally important. It is the restoration of the truth of race relations in this country. We have already told you about the founding of the country, kind of, and I warn everybody that's going to watch, black and white, you're going to learn stuff about your country that is both good and ugly, that you didn't know. Watch for it all summer as we try to restore our own history, good and bad. Back with us, David Barton, Jane Hampton Cook, and we are talking about founding women and women around the Revolutionary War. Raven, you have a question.
Yes. First, I want to thank you all for everything that you're doing to help restore our country. We do appreciate it. Throughout my academic career, whenever I've learned about heroic women, the name Margaret Sanger came up pretty often, and it wasn't until later that I learned that Sanger was, pretty much a terrible person. And
wait. In school, they don't teach the truth about Margaret Sanger.
No, she's a champion of women's rights, is what we're told.
She is one of, you really read, if nobody has really done it, you go home and you Google Margaret Sanger and really get down to her real words on progressivism, and she's one of the most horrible women in American history.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree. And I'm just figuring this out now that, not only is revisionist history writing these women out, but they are elevating a woman like Sanger and removing the truth about her. And I just want to know who is behind this. Is this something else we can attribute to our, contemptible Woodrow Wilson?
Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson really was one of the main guys who did it. There were many architects. We talked about Bernays, and correct me, David, if you know, or if you know any of this. But Bernays was a guy who we learned, we taught the Germans propaganda. Everybody thinks Hitler was the best at propaganda. No. Goebbels said they learned it from Woodrow Wilson's administration and Bernays. We changed the history books. We changed the Constitution. We changed everything under Woodrow Wilson. And it was honestly because, like today, you couldn't win health care just by debate. George Washington said, meet me on the battlefield of ideas. You couldn't win with this debate because the Constitution and our founders were so strong. So when Woodrow Wilson was pushed back by 1920, they knew they had to do something, and they had to disconnect us from faith, our founders, and really the truth of our Constitution. Correct?
Correct. And it's that thing, too, again, 1903, that revisionism, that transformational change. They want to tear down the traditional heroes, build new heroes. What better hero for the progressives to use than a progressive hero like Margaret Sanger? Yeah. So we're going to get rid of Abigail Adams and all these others. We'll put in the progressives because that's what we want to become. Yeah. And that's it.
There's nobody that would ever call themselves a progressive. You might call yourself a liberal, but no one would call themselves a progressive if they really, really read the original works, not the history books, the original works of these people. You in the back, I'm sorry, your name is?
Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi. I just want to thank you so much. I have to say I have learned more about the history of our country just watching your show than I did in all my years in high school.
Thank you.
Elementary school. My question relating to that is I want to know what the intention of our school administrators were of leaving out these important events of these women fighting for our country. Why didn't I learn any of this? And this is all new to me now.
I think that sometimes it's not always, I think sometimes they don't know either. And as a writer, I really want to bring history to life, and I want to go to the original words of the people who lived it. I've buried myself in the Library of Congress to find books of original writings. And when you read someone's original words, Abigail's original words, it's completely different. And you see their story from their perspective. And that's you know, I think that's an important thing to do.
That's the way history used to be. We have to take a break, but that's the way history used to be. Go to the original source. Jefferson took a step further and said, never read a book out of its original language because you'll lose too much. We have some egghead tell us about it instead of going and reading their words. When you read their words, read the diaries of Columbus or of any of the founders or the Pilgrims. Totally different story. Yeah. Totally different story. Back in a second. Jane Hampton Cook wrote a couple of books, Faith, The Faith of America's First Ladies, and Battlefields and Blessings, Stories of Faith and Courage from the Revolutionary War, and Wives of the Signers by David Barton. And David, this is actually not your writing.
No, that's a reprint of a 1911 textbook. We used to know this stuff.
Okay, and show me the other one from...
This is an 1848 textbook. It's 2 volumes. It's on the women of the Revolution. These were not hidden stories. They were out there. We had textbooks all full of these things.
They are now, and all we know now about women in the Revolution is we think that we know a couple of stories, but then the rest, everybody was just an oppressed woman, as we found out earlier, that didn't have a right to vote. Yes, in New Jersey you did. Billy, you have a question.
I think one of the most intriguing women is a black girl who rose from being sold naked on an auction block to entree into George Washington's camps even. And I know David knows the story of Phyllis Wheatley, and I think we'd like to hear it.
David?
Phyllis Wheatley was brought to America as a 6-year-old girl, stolen from Senegal. She was sold as a slave. She was bought by the Wheatley family, and they adopted her as a daughter. She became a daughter. She, at the age of 6, not knowing English, entered into studies on Latin, geography, you name it. She was.
Where was she? Where was?
Boston. This is in Boston.
Was it highly unusual to adopt a
Now, a lot of Christian families would adopt slaves, buy them from slaves to make them part of the family and keep them from going into slavery. And the Wheatley family did that. By 12, her poetry is being published. She's the first black poetess in America. She is a child prodigy. She wrote a particularly great poem for George Whitefield. She wrote another one to honor George Washington. Washington actually had her come before the officers and read her poetry because it's a morale, but she's like the first USO, you know, keep the morale of the troops high. And Washington had her, she was baptized in Old South Church, probably the first black baptized in that church, but went to church there with whites and everyone else. So she broke through a lot of barriers, was a really great lady, and helped support the troops morale-wise in the Revolution, but is a great poetess, great poetess.
What was the thing that surprised you most when you first started doing research and looking into the women of the American Revolution and the women of the presidents?
Well, you know, Martha Washington surprised me the most because I had kind of a dowdy picture of her, and she was a Spartan. I mean, one of the colonels described Martha as being Spartan, that she was very tenacious. And when George took up the command of the Continental Army, she realized he wasn't coming home anytime soon, and that's why she was spent 50% of the time on the road with him. And she did that knowing that the British were out to kidnap her. She did that knowing that she was going to have to get the smallpox inoculation, and she was deathly afraid of that at that time. So she faced some pretty significant fears and made that bold, courageous decision to travel and join him year after year.
Was there love? Was their love true? Because I've read stories, you know, you never know unless you read their words. I read a history about George Washington, and it's the contemporary history of George Washington is he really didn't love her.
I think if she thought that, she wouldn't have spent 50% of the war with him.
You know, the other thing is she specifically asked that her letters be burned. She wanted her letters because there was so much personal stuff back and forth, and they just didn't want that becoming public. And you'll find that a lot of the founders, John Adams asked for a lot of his letters be burned because he didn't want that out publicly.
Wouldn't that be great? Instead of, you know, Sandy Berger stealing them in his underpants later, wouldn't it be great to have people that were serving that were just saying, my personal stuff, completely out? Final thoughts, next. This 4th of July, do me a favor and don't just have hot dogs and hamburgers and, talk about the pool or whatever. Talk to your kids about our founders. Share one story that really intrigues you. Try to really have that become alive in their mind. Everybody in the audience tonight is going home with a copy of David's book, Wives of the Signers. And make sure to check out Jane Hampton Cook's columns posted this weekend on foxnews.com on why we should read the Declaration of Independence. From New York, good night, America.